Hello and welcome to Josiah is Right. I've discovered this Kickstarter for Order of Dracula, and so Joseph Duis and I connected, and he's gonna talk in a minute. But it was cool. As I was looking over it, I was really intrigued because first of all, of course, just Dracula that grabs me in and of itself, and then reading about what he's done with the comic and what he's doing with the future ones is the element of history that's tied into it because my background is so I have a master's in screenwriting from USC, but my background prior to that, which is also from USC, is in history. So I've always loved combining history and stories, and I've always been intrigued by things that do that, especially when it's things like Dracula that aren't necessarily um real, but partially are, you know what I mean? Like the version of Dracula that we know. But that's why part of why Dracula is so intriguing. And one of those classes at USC in the undergrad was about like deconstructionist era writing, right? About like H.G. Wells, The War of the Worlds, and all these things that were sort of the fear of the virus and all that stuff at the turn of the previous century or I don't know, like 1800s to the 1900s, and looking at Dracula through that context of using it used newspaper clips and use these things that use technology to tell this story in a way that was innovative at that time. And so that struck me and hooked me in with just that sort of element of Dracula, that what made it real was kind of setting Dracula in a real world, like historically, like especially looking back on it. So it was really cool to see your comic sort of jumps off and uses that almost as a springboard of history to tell more stories with Dracula, not just retelling some of the same Dracula story, but in new ways.
One thing we did was it kind of blended this with the Arabian Nights. Since our story, three-quarters of the story kind of takes place during the Middle Eastern campaign of World War One and the Arab Revolt that was concurrent with that. We used a lot of the stuff from T.E. Lawrence's Seven Pillars of Wisdom to kind of get a background on what actually happened then. And then I sort of took that as an inspiration, but used that as scenes that were more fantastical. Um, and then we also have Scheherazade, the narrator of the Arabian Nights, as still being alive at this time. She's kind of a unique undead being. And then we also use the narrative structure of the Arabian Nights, where we have a story inside of a story, and at one point we even have a story inside of a story inside of a story. Aside from being over one story and aside from being a Dracula story, we also took inspiration from the Arabian Nights, so that it's sort of a literary reference at the same time as a historical reference. And unlike you, I really have more of a history background than a writing background. Um, so I took real historical events and the structure of T.E. Lawrence's book, along with the structure of the actual history of the actual Dracula, along with the structure of the history of the Irish independence movement, and I kind of mix all those things in together for this story.
Cool. So just elaborate a little bit then on your background, which was part of what was intriguing to me because I do have a background in history, but it's like, the smaller part and then the shift to the focus to the creative writing side. So give a little bit of a context for your background.
Yeah, I have undergrad degrees in history and psychology from the College of William and Mary, and then I also have a master's in history from George Mason. This is back when I lived on the East Coast. So now I live in Colorado. Yeah, so I did always want to be a fiction writer, and I took some fiction writing classes. I took creative writing and fiction writing. Actually, my professor is one of the guys who wrote the Malcolm X movie. If you remember from your screenwriting stuff, he did get fired. He wasn't the final writer, but he said he actually bought a condo with the proceeds of getting fired. So I don't feel too
Oh, that's
bad.
funny. I'll say
Yeah.
it's funny. I did study the not the screenplay version, but we did talk about that. I took a class that was called As Told To, and it was a biography or a biography writing class. That's what I was going to say. So, but basically writing someone else's story using their voice, and that as the biography of Malcolm X is, it's an as told to story. He told it, but he didn't write it, and so we kind of use that as context. So there is a connection in that way of like storytelling and using sort of again connecting it back to actual history. So
Yeah, I actually took a grad school history class. It was all about American autobiographies and what they said about America and about the American dream and that kind of thing is really interesting, starting with the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin and kind of how that was sort of a template for American autobiographies where they tended to be really focused on individual accomplishment and they downplayed any sort of collectivist action. And I actually did a paper where with that as told to thing, I actually read Charles Manson's biography, which was he told to someone else and someone else wrote it down while he was in prison and compared that with Benjamin Franklin. So that was that was kind of an interesting comparison. Because there definitely is kind of a through line from every single American autobiography, and because it is a story, and talking about Thomas Edward Lawrence's Seven Pillars of Wisdom, that's considered to be not 100% true. A lot of the stuff in there. But it's really the only first person account we have of the Arab Revolt. So kind of took that as a starting point. Some things in there are definitely exaggerated. Some things are downplayed. They probably shouldn't be. Some things are upplayed. They shouldn't be. Um, but I really love that idea of using that book as kind of inspiration because just like um, just like Lawrence did in his book, we use actual real historical events mixed in with other things that are fictional.
no, that's really cool. And that was really interesting to me because, again, and I'm also working on a project that, so I wrote a novel that I'm, uh, hoping to get published soon. And with that, it's set in the 1990s in Pennsylvania, where I grew up. And the idea is that the characters within that story have their own, pop culture and fiction that they love. So they have comic books and things that only exist within that world. And one of the stories that I created for that is like sort of the world within a world follows like the idea of this superhero who came along exactly when America was founded, and therefore is sort of like the reason that America had the sway and influence through all these wars and whatnot. So I'm always intrigued, like the historian in me likes that, but then the creative person in me likes to also see where you can bend those things and take them different ways and use either history or other creative works that are themselves kind of historical as your structure, as a jumping off point that kind of grounds things in a way and then allows you to tell your own unique stories.
Yeah, yeah, we do that definitely with Dracula in our comics. Is he has this single-minded pursuit where he wants to destroy the Ottoman Empire because while he died and he's able to learn new things, he's not able to really change emotionally. He's kind of stuck in 1477 still. So um, he still is trying to get his revenge on the Ottoman Empire. He wants revenge for his brother and his father that were killed. Um, and he also still sees himself as a sort of a Christian holy warrior and feels like he has the responsibility to defeat the empire. Um, and so we see him kind of on getting involved in a lot of different independence movements in the world, and also wars that involve the Ottomans. So he sort of tangentially gets involved in the Arab independence movement. He gets involved with an Irish separatist who's involved in the Irish independence movement, and then we'll see some other ones later on down the line. We know history is written by the victors, but we tend to see the independence movement as the people who want independence are the good guys. But kind of putting it on its head and saying like maybe some of these people that were involved were not doing it for the right reasons and and so we see Dracula kind of on the side of who we consider to be the good guys, but he's not doing it for any good reason. And then that's true of the other characters too. We have James Fitzharris, who is an Irish separatist, but he's also very Machiavellian. He makes a deal with Dracula to help him with his goals. In exchange, he has to go to Arabia and go undercover in the British military to try to uncover some information about a supernatural creature that's keeping Dracula from assassinating the Sultan. Um, so he's doing that in furtherance of his goal of Irish independence. He hopes that Dracula will keep his end of the bargain and help him. And then he has his son, his estranged son, who when he was 3 years old when his dad was put in prison, so they never really got to know each other. Who is also in the Royal Army. So they have some differences of opinion, and and then there's also an Ottoman spy who helps them out in Arabia, and they're not really sure if she is on their side or not. And then we have Scheherazade, who is only helping out Dracula because of she has to collect stories or else she's going to die. So she gets Dracula's story in exchange for helping him out with giving him information. So everybody has their own agendas, and there's a lot of moving parts. I'm gonna go jump back and forth between times, and there's it's Crusade of Dracula, which is the second part of the story, was a 3-issue miniseries. The first one was called Order of Dracula, and collect all 4 of those in this one, along with the new story showing how Jack the Ripper met Dracula. And so we're hoping, we'll collect this one, and then in the fall, we'll have another one, and we'll have a couple more, and maybe we can do a couple of collections.
Cool. And so again, you this one's a collection of like how many previous issues? I under like just
It's 4 previous issues, but yeah, they were all kind of oversized. So we have 164 pages altogether.
oh cool, very
Plus
awesome.
there's a new story. Um, like I said, the Jack the Ripper story is kind of going to be a preview of our comic we're doing later this year, where we show how Jack the Ripper and Elizabeth Bathory and Enver Bay and we show how Dracula became a vampire. It's kind of going to be like an anthology with a framing sequence. Um, but yeah, so I wanted to have one of those stories in here too. It's just kind of a bonus and a preview for people who maybe have already read the floppy version and they wanted to get the trade and get a little bit of extra story in there.
Cool, that's cool. I always enjoy stuff like that, and plus, I just like that little bit of a, the bonus content is always great, but also the tease of like, oh, this is the next thing, and just even when I was reading through, I'm like, oh, the Jack the Ripper, and I just happened to, for some reason, go down a like a Jack the Ripper YouTube rabbit hole recently. I don't know how it started, but it was just like some, re-upload, of like the History Channel type of thing where it was like, who really was Jack the Ripper, and then it leads to 10 other who was Jack the Ripper videos, and it was just by happenstance before I even read any of this. So I'm on board just for that reason by
Yeah.
the sheer luck of the algorithm. But that's cool. So I guess the question I would have then is why comic books? What is the decision? Why was the decision made to then tell this story in that format?
Well, I started reading comic books when I was about 6, and I saw a comic with it actually was World's Finest Comics number 299. It was Batman had an executioner's hood and no shirt, and he was about to decapitate Superman. So these are characters that I only knew from, I'm dating myself, but I only knew them from Super Friends. That was the only multimedia at the time, and so I read it, and it was like part, I don't know, it was part like four or something like that. So I didn't know what's going on. Um, but uh, but ever since then, it's been really into comic books. So so I was thinking like, I'll make comic books and I'll write comic books. I always wanted to be a writer. I tried doing short stories for a little while, and then I was like, if I'm never really gonna be really successful at this anyway, like I may as well just do what I want to do. I may as well do comics. Um, so I was thinking like, I'm going to stop using short stories. And actually, I actually ended up adapting some of those short stories to comics. It was like, if I'm gonna just do whatever I want anyway, if I'm gonna self-publish anyway, I may as well just make comics. That's what I want to do. I don't want to really write short stories. I mean, I like writing short stories, but I like doing comics better. I love the sort of unique visual language of comics. Like I've read all those Scott McCloud books, and I think it's really interesting. How you're, unlike like say a screenplay, um, for a comic, you're not necessarily seeing every frame. Your imagination has to fill in between the frames, and and I really think that's interesting. And I like the ability of comics to do certain things. Like in this comic, we're doing it a square, 8.5 by 8.5 square, black and white comic. And every time I do one of these, I think about ways in which I can use specific, unique features of medium. So, like in our other comic, we wanted it to look like a 1940s comic, so we just flat colored it and put halftone filter over it. And I think it looks really cool visually. And the same is true of this. Kind of want to make it look like a 1910s comic. It'd be square, and they had comic strips that they would collect, and so I wanted to do it like in that black and white kind of etching square format.
Yeah, and it's cool. Like I hear you say that like the 1940s comic, like looking over some of the stuff, just like some of the images, I totally my thought was, oh, this is like Classics Illustrated, the way it like looked in sort of that style of like the comics of that time, that feeling, which is totally appropriate to that story. Obviously, it just worked, and especially when you have a story that again, even though it's heavily fictionalized, there's a historical context. So when you have that and again, I guess that's what connected me again to when I talked about the original Dracula novel. There was those touchstones in like media of the time, like newspaper things, and it would have like the sort of like it would have the manifest from the ship, whatever it was, that helps tell the story unique ways. It was using different tools that weren't commonly used in literature at that point. That it's the kind of the same thing where just using the touchstone of something visually in that way, even in terms of a style or like you said, the shape, it can lend to your story in different unique ways. So it's really cool and exciting to hear that, to get to see what that has looked like with this one and what it will look like with what you do in the future. So I think that's a really interesting and cool way to do it.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, I guess theoretically we could have told it in any different ways. But I just figured, comics is really my medium, I think. Also, it's not gonna be as expensive as make a movie. Uh, so, um, and I've never really tried to write a screenplay or anything like that. And I've gotten into the groove with certainly at least a couple of these artists that I've used many, many times before, um, where I'm kind of writing the scripts where in a way that they respond to and it's easy for them. Um, so Greg Warrenchuk is our artist for the present day, which is like the 1916 and 1918 story, in Crusade of Dracula, and Raul Crespo is our artist for the 15th century part of the story. And I've worked with them both a lot, and we sort of got to the point where I can write scripts and they understand what's going on. So um, I think like just having that rapport down and working with the same artists over and over, really helps with like there's one point where we recount the building of Dracula's castle, or it's actually a refortification of an old castle that had pretty much fallen into ruin. And there's a classic story about how he invited all after he found out the Boyars were complicit in his brother's death. He invited them all. Um, he invited them all to the palace, and then he took them all out and impaled all of the old people, and the younger ones he marched them up and made them build the castle. So, and they all died in the process. Uh, so, um, so we recount that in the story, and the castle doesn't survive anymore. It's not Bran Castle or any of the ones that are still exist. There's only a little bit left of it. So we used a description of it from historical sources, and I gave it to Raoul, and he was just like all about drawing that castle. Like, like like I was like, all right. I'm doing this, and he drew it, and he was like fascinated by it. So that was really awesome just to give them work that they really really want to do. He loves drawing historical stuff. He actually did a comic. He's Spanish, so he does a lot of Spanish language comics. He did one that was about the Philippine War, and he was really really big into history. So it was really cool to give him something that I really really enjoyed doing.
Awesome. So I guess jumping to the Kickstarter itself. So what are some of the things though, like the types of things that we can get by backing it, like the editions of the comic, any other rewards, stuff like that?
Yeah, so we have the main comic. The main reward is the comic. We have a PDF of the comic. We've got the print copy of the comic, um, which has our new painted cover by Brian LeBlanc, who is a big fantasy traditional painter. The cover is really cool. We also have some lower tiers where, like, if you want Order of Dracula and Crusade of Dracula Book One, without getting the full story, maybe you're not totally sold on it. You can get the PDF, and there's also a print version of that. And then we also have, for the first time, we're offering these Order of the Dragon medallions. So story is revolving around Dracula making alliances with people so that he can continue the Order of the Dragon, which was a chivalric order that his father was a founding member of, whose goal was to collapse the Ottoman Empire. He continues that as a vampire, and so um, in the story, everybody who's in the order, he gives them a medallion that has the the emblem of the Order of Dragon. And so I got an ancient gold medallion made of that. So you can get that as part of one of the rewards. So it's like, you're a member of the Order of Dragon.
I would
And
love though you get that and then you're like walking
yeah,
around and somewhere like you're like at a mall in the
yeah,
middle of you're like here and you're in Southern California, you're over at South Coast Plaza, which is the fun fancy like bougie mall, and then like someone sees you and you see theirs and you both
yeah,
like give a
yeah,
wink, it's like you're like if you know.
yeah,
That's a
yeah,
cool,
yeah.
that's a
And
cool reward though. I love stuff like that though, that like comes from within the story too, so it's not just like t-shirts and all that stuff's great, but this is like a way to do something a little bit more unique, so it's cool to hear when you do things like that. It's fun. So.
yeah, yeah. I said it like I try to keep the merchandise to a minimum, but I was like, if I can do one thing with this, like, and it's a trade, so the art's already done. So, like, let me think about like put some thought into what would be appropriate merchandise, and then maybe I'll do one thing. And that was the one thing that I did, and I got a prototype of it. It looked really cool. So, and it feels really cool too. And then the other thing is we have one it's all that plus original art pages from the first story, which is Order of Dracula. And so I think there's like still 15 of those left. But yeah, that's it. We kept it to be pretty simple. My goal is always to prioritize fulfillment. So um, if we have like a million tiers of a bunch of complex stuff, it gets to slow down fulfillment. So um, yeah, that's all we got to do. And actually, I've already ordered the print order, so I should have that probably around the time the campaign is over. So
Oh,
uh,
cool. Very cool. So
yeah, so
everything
I'll have the
you'll get it
comics
right away.
already.
Yeah, and this is we're recording this right on the cusp of the wrapping of the campaign. It'll be up very soon. So as we record this Sunday, it should be up. You should be watching this Monday. So just know that you are within like what the last 4 days of the campaign. So if you're watching this, be sure to hop on there. And if not, if it's over, you can obviously still there will be still ways you can find these comics, and all that will be linked below to make sure you can support these unique take on Dracula. And you'll look for go to the mall and look for someone wearing that medallion and then give them a high five. So
Yeah, yeah. So I've been writing the script for our next Dracula comic, and I also started to think of like what would be the code phrases they use to recognize each other. So so you got the medallion, and then you got to say the code phrase.
that's cool. But you have to like when you can only this is what you do is you only know that code phrase if you purchase that medallion, and it'll be
Yeah,
sent to
that's
you with the
right.
medallion. We're not going to say it here, so you got to
Yeah.
get it to know, and then you'll know, and then That'll get you. We don't know what it'll get you yet. We haven't gone that far, but yeah, then
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So
exactly.
then, so what's the tease for your next? You said you'll start. You already, you obviously the sort of the preview version of it is in this Kickstarter. Sort of, it's a little bit of that add-on Jack the Ripper stuff. So when can we look forward to that?
So I think I probably will launch around August, September. Hopefully. Yeah, so the script is pretty much done editing. Like I said, one of the stories is completely done. So it's going to be 35 pages, four stories. It's called Two-Eyed Tales of Dracula. We have a line called Two-Eyed Tales, which is a horror, black and white horror anthology brand. We've had a couple of comics in that, and then we have the Dracula ones. This is kind of a crossover that where we show kind of like little anecdotes in Dracula's life. The framing sequence is he's talking to Anne Verbay, who is a famous character from Turkish history, uh, trying to get him to form an alliance with him. And as he's talking to him, that's the framing sequence. So there's like three other stories. One of the stories is how he met Jack the Ripper, and one is with Elizabeth Bathory. And I actually really like the title of the Bathory story. It's called "They Stole Dracula's Head." And then the biggest main part of the story kind of shows what happened after he died and how he became a vampire.
Cool. That's cool. It's yeah, something to look forward to, like I said. But again, right now there'll be a link below us. Click that link to go support the Kickstarter. Check it out. You can see, the pages that exist and learn, a little bit more of what you've talked about here. You can see the medallion, of course, which I'm sure thanks to the magic of editing, I'll have cut to some samples of that medallion for you. But any sort of final thoughts before we wrap it up, Joseph?
No, not really. Yeah, we are finishing February 2nd, the evening of February 2nd. So it's only a 10-day campaign. So do not delay.
Yeah, so exactly. And I will not delay. I am going to say goodbye to Joseph and thank you so much for your time. I'm gonna get off this and then I'm gonna start editing and it'll be up Monday morning. Everybody will be able to see this. But again, hop on that so you can support it right away because as he said, we're right now we're at the halfway point to record this and we'll be beyond that when it comes tomorrow morning when you can watch this. Thank you so much for making the comics you make. Thank you for your time and I will catch you. I was gonna oh, what my joke? In the mall with our medallions, and we'll just give each other a nod, and we'll know, and then we'll have the secret code words by then. So,
Yeah, thanks for having me.
thank you so much.